Rita Garwood, Editor-in-Chief of Monitor. Joining me on the podcast today are Alistair Cannell, Scott Nelson, and Spencer Thomas. Alistair is president of Syndify. Scott is Chief Technology Officer at Tamarack Technology, and Spencer is CEO of KLC Financial. Thanks to all of you for being on the podcast today. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Rita.
Thank you, Rita.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Yeah, so Alistair, I want you to kick things off for us. Can you just give us some background on what led to today's discussion? What inspired the idea of bringing the three of you together for this podcast?
Yeah, thanks, Rita, for that. And thank you for the opportunity for us to have this discussion and this conversation. I'm a firm believer that through collaboration, great things happen. And the reason I thought it would be a good conversation and to share sort of this journey and this story, if you will, is, we've got this industry that's on the verge of a really cool transformation, right? With the modernization of a lot of different components of how this industry operates. And it's sort of a design to help take it forward and to grow it through meaningful technology. And the mindset is what I think we're going to discuss here today, and kind of walk a step in Spencer's shoes as the leader of his company at KLC, walk many steps in Scott's shoes as this sort of technologist who's got an amazing tech stack that he's got built, and Syndify sort of in the middle of all things sort of syndication and all things sort of EF, right, equipment finance. And this story is a pretty unique one, and I feel it's one that is going to resonate with a lot of leaders that are in similar shoes as Spencer is. So the overall reason was, how do we discuss best practices, and what we're striving for here is this sort of trifecta to really put the client first. And what sort of mindset does a client have to kind of know what really the options are, and sort of what the best practices and the approach could be to emptying out that bucket and figuring out what is good processes, technology, and collaboration look like between EF companies and vendors that are out there, whether it's Tamarack or Syndify. For us, it doesn't matter with respect to the meaning of this discussion. It really matters to how do we help grow this industry through these kind of unique scenarios and partnerships. I hope that sort of sets the stage and answers the question, and that's what we got.
Yeah, it definitely does. So thank you for that, Alistair.
Okay.
So Spencer, I want to turn it over to you. So as Alistair mentioned, you're the client in this situation. I'd like you to put yourself back at the beginning of this journey that you had. What challenges were piling up on your plate that made you realize that you needed to lean on technology to solve them?
Yeah, thanks, Rita, and Alistair, and thank you as well for the opportunity. Yeah, so the issue we had, or the challenge we have, is in building and developing our syndication desk, especially on the sell side, and the unique challenges that come with that, in creating efficiencies, process efficiencies that can enable us to be as fast and as possible, and to communicate as well as possible, keeping in mind have data security, safety and soundness of the information, and in both the proprietariness of how KLC does business, but ultimately we are looking for a system that would allow us to create the rails that would make our whole syndication process as fast and easy and efficient as possible, and then also make it easy for our the funding sources, banks who we work with, to do business with us. So it's really all about being a good partner and creating the tools to help us get that done.
So Scott, we haven't heard from you yet. When you hear Spencer list those challenges, what jumps out to you from a technology perspective, and where's the biggest friction?
Well, first, the first thing that jumps out to me is Spencer is kind of one of the most aware innovators that we've worked with. You heard him say, make it easy to work with funders who are a type of customer in the syndication, domain. And of course, getting funding is serving customers on the other side, the borrowers. So that we always enjoy working with people who understand that it's not really about the technology, it's about what you can do with the technology. And most innovations, nobody sees the technology. They just see they got an iPhone that can connect to anybody. They don't know what's inside of it, right? And so we love that kind of engagement. And um, we came to this trifecta here. We saw Syndify, Alistair and the Syndify team announced that, when they announced, and we saw that they hit a nerve. We already could see private capital was changing the market of capital, so to speak. And we already knew, because we handle all the data of a company. We knew about the importance of security, and that Spencer mentioned security and communication. And then really it kind of comes down to, how does one use technology to create the emotion of trust? How do you create trust? I mean, most people will say you create trust by doing what you say you're going to do for 10 years, and then you lose it if you screw up once, right? But trust is an emotional thing, but it's absolutely critical to this process. And so we looked at it from a helping establish data integrity, helping get the right data in the right place at the right time, get the data that people want to create trust. And I think that's what we're excited about this trio, is that we're all working on, Spencer's working to grow the business, and he knows how important that trust is, but we're creating, trust in us and trust in the process.
So, Alistair, let's turn it back to you. You work with a lot of companies at different stages. How common are the challenges that Spencer talked about, and how do providers avoid overwhelming leaders who already have so much in their bucket?
It's a really good question. Over the years, I've had a lot of discussions with leaders that are driving their business forward in all capacities, right? So I would say it's very common. So Spencer's story, his mindset, sort of what he's challenged with, I think it resonates across the industry with especially with the independents, right? And the newly bank-owned independents, which is where Spencer lies right now. So, but one thing I'll note, and I'll put an asterisk real quick to Scott's comments. One thing he didn't share is his mindset to approach Syndify to collaborate, right? And that's an important note to take here is when technology companies sort of have the non-myopic view and look through a lens of client first, that's what they do, and vice versa, right? So that was the sort of the genesis of, hey, how do we work together? And Spencer driving kind of Scott to say, hey, you guys should really talk, and him doing that and really having the open playbook to figure out what that looks like. But with respect to the mindset out there and the challenges, it exists, it's real, right? I think when these leaders are thrust with so many different things and so many different challenges that come upon them, they really have to take a step back and look through an optic that is a lot broader. And when we walk in Spencer's shoes here, we've got rapidly changing landscape on all fronts, right? On buyer demands, investor demands, partner demands, technology demands, the customer demands that are what he's striving to achieve and fulfill better than anybody to have that edge. A lot of current tech stacks that exist in companies today. Some are being utilized, some are not. Some are really well known, some are not. So I think it's assessing, what are we looking to do? What's that sort of goal line looking like if I'm walking in Spencer's shoes? And how do we create lift, ROI, and how do we have a smooth adoption? And then moreover is, how do we make sure that the new ownership who just took over our company, if you're in Spencer's shoes, knows that we're sort of looking at this 30,000, 15, and 5,000 feet to make sure that we're creating a playbook that's going to win and get us to the end zone. So it's really just simplifying the process from Scott and my perspective on helping them adopt and grow and build and win. So I hope that answers the question, Rita.
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So we've talked a lot about the challenge, and with all challenges and technology change comes having to navigate change within your company, right? So Spencer, I'd love it if you could take us inside the walls of KLC for a minute and just talk about the experience of the team. Who on the team did you lean on the most as you worked through all of these decisions? Was it operations, your CTO, other people? And how did you get everyone aligned and rowing in the same direction?
Yeah, thanks, Rita. At KLC, we have a very collaborative approach internally. I know Alistair and Scott both talked about collaboration between the three companies here, but that collaboration really starts here inside the walls, as you said, of KLC. And so, when you ask me that question, I automatically think of like 10 people, because it really is all of us. We use a management tool called EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, which is a regular cadence of meetings, weekly or maybe more often, occasionally, but establishing rocks, to-dos, weekly rocks every quarter, doing quarterly meetings and thinking about what are the goals of the company. And I was talking to Carolyn Caruso actually, and talking about the Merlin principle, right? And it's a bit like that. Hey, where do we want to be in 10 years? Where do we want to be in 5 years? Where do we want to be in 3 years? Where do we want to be at the end of this year? And then what do we have to do this quarter, this week, today to get there, right? And with that in mind, we bubble up these ideas, we bubble up these questions, and we so to directly answer your question, I guess when we're going through this whole process, who do I lean on? I lean on Brett Sorensen, Chief Revenue Officer. He oversees the syndication side of the business. All of our technology is at the bank level, and some really talented people in that department. Amy Lewis, our Chief Operation Officer, oversees process and systems at KLC, and so Amy's involved. I already mentioned Brett. Shannon Smith, Chief Credit Officer, oversees credit, right? So he has he plays into this as well. And then in the front line we have Jacob Fall and John Gauger, who's helping us as well. And they're working with the syndication partners and actually doing the syndication, right? And so really it's that whole group, and I'm sure I left many people out, but how do you get that kind of group to collaborate, and how do you actually get traction and get things done? I credit it a lot to again EOS and that structure that allows us to get input and then assign tasks to who and which group and which person is going to run with the ball. So it's a huge effort here, and that's how we get stuff done.
Sounds like you have a lot of people doing awesome things, Spencer. That's great. So I know that's not the case for all companies, though. In some cases, it's harder to get that sort of alignment. So Alistair, from your seat, what kind of role can providers play in helping leaders like Spencer cascade the message that comes with the new technology implementation internally and making sure the whole team feels confident in the shift that's coming up?
Yeah, that's a really important question, right? Because Spencer said it's a partnership, and when I look at that for a vendor, for a tech company, as they're sort of getting in the boat with that client to ensure, as you said, Rita, you're rowing in the right direction. You have to have a process, right? I think every good tech company has a well laid out process, a process that they can pivot and move and sort of navigate the fjord of each unique scenario and any client's kind of house, if you will. And then you get that process, and then you collaborate, as Spencer said, with that client, with the team. For me, it's paramount, and it leads to such greater success when Spencer, who's that sort of forward-thinking leader, and he knows who his key players are, and he leverages those guys, right? Every manager, every coach, every leader does that well. So it's setting that vision together, the vendor and the client, sort of seeing what you can both do together, and really trying to picture that end zone. What does that end zone look like? What are the goals, and how do we get there? And to do that, my thought process is you ask a lot of questions, you do a lot of listening, you really do a lot of communicating back and forth, and you set those expectations out of the gate, and that's commitment, right? So each side has to be committed to that, and you sort of lay out, what is this going to take, what does this look like, and these are the things it's going to take, and to do this we have to make sure we're doing all these different things, and lots of empathy too, right? We talk about walking a step or two in people's shoes. one needs to know what Spencer's going to be going through. One needs to know how it impacts, Jacob Fall and Brett and the internal team that is sort of with Spencer as they're going through this. Is it going to slow the processes down internally at KLC? Will it impact revenue a little bit because you're implementing new technologies? Those are all questions to think about and to take into account, and then make sure that Spencer on high has that expectation so he can understand where his team's at internally. So it's a lot of different things, but it's all about the climb as we're talking about here. And when you have that mindset and you strive for that, things happen in a great way.
So, Scott, you've seen and worked with a lot of companies who have wrestled with the choices that come with implementing new technology. In your opinion, what separates the companies that are successful from the ones that struggle?
Well, my first answer will be a kind of, high level. It's leadership. Leadership has to describe the vision to and empower the people. When Spencer says all those people, he's empowering them to, to work towards his vision. But leadership is first. And then the second thing about that leadership that we see just absolutely, almost night and day, is fear of failure. There's been a lot of tech failures in this industry. There's been, I've heard about 24-month migrations, and we fight it every time we show up. We tell somebody we can hook up in 4 weeks, and they're thinking it's 6 months no matter what we say, and part of what Alistair's talking about with collaboration in tech companies is we've done it before, we've hooked up before, we can do things quickly if everybody kind of gets going. But I think first and foremost is leadership. The fear of failure of tech, the failure of tech is always something that slows us down. And Alistair and I talk, and a lot of times an organization will have a very dynamic advocate for tech and tech people. It may be for one, for a provider, it may just be for tech. And a lot of times those people do really well and they move around. When they move around, they bring tech with them. But when they leave, sometimes they leave a hole. And then we don't have the advocacy, even if leadership wants it. Then you see if leadership steps up and was really behind it. And so I think those are kind of the things that I would think about. And as a vendor, what we really try to do, and Timothy Applegate, our director of SaaS products, does this better than anybody, is empower the team, to get to Spencer's team and know what they need and make them feel like they can ask us questions and ask us for things. And our product improves every time we get a question, because I think that's something that if you're not in tech, you probably are not aware of how fast it moves now and how easy it is to move, and how powerful it is when you just ask questions and say, can I do this? Our first high use syndication builder customer had one data tape for everybody. I think they just had established a relationship with their borrowers that everybody gets the same data tape. It's a good data tape. It gives them what they want. Others will have 9 different tapes. And from our perspective, I think Alice should say the same thing. We don't care, 1 or 50, tech doesn't care, right? I mean, Amazon doesn't care if 100 people sign up or 5 million from a tech point of view. They do from a commerce point of view, but good tech scales. And so the more people that get involved, the better everything is.
So true. So, Scott, you had mentioned in what you had just described the collaboration that has speeded things up when it comes to technology. I wanted to talk about that for a little bit. Spencer, you mentioned that you saw overlap with what Tamarack and Syndify were doing, not in the products, but in the ideas. What made you push for collaboration between the tech providers and your company?
Yeah, first of all, there's so much great technology going on. But one of the challenges really is that you can just have system overload, right? You got so many different systems that are fragmented, and we're really just trying to work with ultimately, a handful of really good partners that can bring us the systems and tools and value that we need. And both Scott and Alistair have just sensational ideas and technology and approaches. And as I talked to both of them and thinking about what our needs were and what their offerings were, it just made so much sense to me that I just saw that um, they're they had, like you mentioned, some overlap, but also some really neat and smart approaches. And I thought, man, if we could just get the three of us, along with some KLC team members I mentioned earlier, in a room together, I really think we can make some, fantastic progress and come up with a solution that we can all benefit from. So, and I really compliment both of them on just having an open mind. We try to have an open mind here at KLC, and like Scott said, one of the challenges with anything new, especially new technology, is fear of failure, right? And so we embrace that. I mean, we're going to fail occasionally, but we are trying to be out in front of technology and try to make sure that we're using the best tools and the best systems available to help us maximize value for our shareholders and for our customers and for our employees. So anyway, we were able to get together, the three of us. Again, they had an open mind, and hey, let's do it. And that's what got us here today. So that's anyway, the conversation went obviously fed really well and continues today. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
So, Alistair, what went through your mind when Spencer said, "Hey, you and Scott should work together on this"? How did you approach that request?
That's a great question. I think the first thought was Spencer gets it, right? And it takes a really confident leader to sort of get it that way. And more importantly, some of the things that Spencer and Scott sort of chatted about, it takes a really good leader to understand and to walk a step in all the individual shoes that are at his company. Because there's not only fear of failure from a, hey, will this tech work? It's fear of failure of hey, am I going to be, put out of a job because this technology can perhaps, do some of what I'm doing or help the company grow, their business. And it's Spencer at the top and any of the leaders saying, guys, we're in this together. And I understand what you're going through. I understand some of the thoughts you may be having, but we're doing this. So each and every person in this room who's on this team to grow and drive tech, have confidence. I've got your back. We're going to have our bumps. We're going to have our bruises. And tech isn't perfect. Like this trifecta, it didn't happen, instantly. The product wasn't, beautifully running smoothly right out of the gate. It's tech. It takes time. It takes the understanding that that's what's going to happen. So, what Spencer touched on is how do I empty out the bucket and find the best in class and understand that one, tech isn't going to solve all of our problems here at KLC, especially now that we have other influencers and stakeholders who want to see different growth models and success. So his view of let's really see what's out there, let's assess what we have and put the pieces together here and align with partners who get it. And I, align with Scott's comment about technology companies being able to sort of assimilate and build and grow for the industry. That's one of Syndify's, you know, real pleasures is talking to all these industry experts. And when they say, "What about this? Can it do that? Can we make it do this? It would be awesome if it did this." We typically try to do it. And Dan Michaelek, my partner and founder of Syndify, who is really the visionary and who is the one who knew that a nerve could be hit if we create this great product. Our thought process is the more information we get, the more insights we get, the better we can build our product and deliver a success for someone like Spencer and his team. So we're really excited about this and are really delighted by what this is going to help us do in the future with other technology companies and forward thinkers like Spencer. So and partners like Scott. So yeah, that's what we got. So that's what I thought is Spencer gets it. And it'd be great if more leaders got it because Scott and my job would be a heck of a lot easier as we venture down the road to infuse this great technology in these companies.
So Scott, how about you? What convinced you to say yes to the collaboration, and what did collaboration look like from your perspective?
Um, well, I'll have to say, I've worked in technology for much longer than I would like to admit, but over 35 years. And I was taught at a very early age by some phenomenal systems people at Honeywell that, collaboration isn't a nice to have, it's a must have when you're dealing with tech. Everything moves too fast for anybody to be the best of everything, right? So you always have to do it. So, as soon as I saw Syndify's announcement and the people involved, I said, okay, these are people that are doing something that's important. And, you can always have overlaps. At some level, Tamarac's biggest competitor is our customers' IT groups because we can do for them what they do themselves. I know Alistair will have the same feeling. Um, but collaboration is just table stakes for a tech company, particularly in a modular cloud world today. I mean, if you don't understand APIs and build everything with APIs and everything is a hookup, you know, we do data hookups, Rita, to the big systems like Solify in a day. In a day and a half, we hook up and all the data is moving these days, right? And from our perspective, what we're trying to do is, when I came to this industry, I saw that, man, there's a lot of data here. And I came kind of from an IoT space. It's another one of the reasons I'm a big fan of Spencer's. Spencer actually hooked us up with an IoT vendor at one point, Spencer. You remember you were looking at trying to track everything and you wanted to see where it was at all times. And that's something I think is still coming. Um, but the data has to be organized and ready to perform, and everything is done by data. And AI is teaching everybody that now. AI takes it to the next level because it builds predictive models as opposed to deterministic models. But um, it's really it's really about collaboration to because nobody it's just there's just way too much to understand what's going on behind an LLM. I watched a video last night that just buried me in terminology. Some guy from IBM on a special light board. I was most enamored with his light board, Rita. You should go get one of those for your podcast. But I'll add one thing to the leadership statement that Alistair made, which is good enough. Some organizations, good enough is not a very high bar, and they stick with spreadsheets and they stick with manual processes. And someone like Spencer, Spencer's a business athlete. It's never good enough. I can always do better. And that's what drives the engagement with us, and not being afraid to say, I tried it and it didn't work. We tried some things along the way, and it doesn't kill you. You learn from it and you move on. But good enough is a thing that I think is a passive enemy in organizational growth. Anytime someone says that, you should make a note and come back and ask, because tech kind of makes good enough obsolete at all times, because you can always do better somewhere. And then that you can't always do better in an ROI that's positive, but you can always do better. And I think the thing that we try to do is help people just understand what they want to do and get past good enough.
So good enough is kind of in opposition to innovation. And from what you're saying, Spencer kind of embodies that mindset of innovation.
He wouldn't have called me, or he called both Alistair and I at some point in the past, but he called us separately. And then at one point he says, okay, let's do this together. And yeah, I mean, you heard him say what he wanted to do. I got to go faster. I got to go faster. I got to have the right data in the right place. What we're doing right now is not good enough. That's core to the understanding of the first discussion.
Yeah. And Spencer, earlier you said you're not really afraid of breaking things. You're trying to move fast. You're trying to be ahead with technology. And that requires, knowing that things might not work right away. What mindset or culture shift inside KLC made you comfortable taking that risk when others might sit back and wait because they are afraid of what might happen?
Yeah, there's some things I'm afraid to break, right? So I think first understanding what parts of the business you got to go slower with, and you got to you can in what parts of the business, or I guess what the foundation is, and having that buttoned up, and then understanding what pieces of the business or the process that where there is flexibility, and thinking about that here at KLC. And you asked about the culture. The culture here has always been, uh, well, for a long time anyway, one of innovation, one of being, aggressive, being entrepreneurial, right? And then, as we talked about earlier, KLC is owned now by Gulf Coast Bank and Trust. We're a wholly owned subsidiary of the bank, and so that brings in another, of course, a very important element of being part of a regulated institution, right? And so we have to think about how that, how we approach that entrepreneurial mindset inside of the right controls, the right approach, working with the bank on decisions and on strategy, uh, thinking through who our partners are, and presenting all that. And so certainly we work, hand in hand with the bank. Fortunately, the leadership group at the bank level is also quite forward thinking and entrepreneurial in their approach, and so also very innovative. And so that's been a real, just a huge plus to have a partner like Gulf Coast Bank and Trust. I can't say enough about them. So again, thinking about, as we have these meetings, like I talked about earlier internally, hey, here are the things that we are non-negotiables. Here's where we have the ability to be more flexible. Here's where we can try, and different systems and different tools, and be really tech forward. So yeah, and again, it's just bringing the whole team together, agreeing as a team on this is what we want to do, assigning tasks, keeping people accountable, and executing. So
Scott, shifting back to you, you were talking about that good enough versus innovation before. From your perspective, what's the biggest difference between innovators like Spencer and those companies that are holding back?
Um, I'll say two things. You know, the two of them go together, but the first is empathy. You got to have customer empathy in order to have enough vision and enough confidence that you need to make a change. And then you look at what you're doing, and and if you're saying, is this good enough for my customer? That's the empathy part. And if not, okay, what can I do to serve them better? What can I do that's better? At which point you're making change, which is innovation. And most of the time you're trying to get, you're changing behavior. Innovation is a change in behavior in our definition. And you're either changing the behavior of your people to better serve the customer, that's an innovation, or you're changing the customer's behavior. Usually you want them to buy more from you, but that's a change in behavior, right? But you're doing it with, I think empathy is just absolutely key. How close are you to the industry's needs at an almost emotional level? KLC has that brand. They have a brand in this market. I know other lenders in this market, and they have a brand of somebody who cares. And when people get frustrated, they'll say, and I've heard them say, I said, well, go talk to KLC. And that's a brand that cares, and the caring is the empathy. So that's my first thing, and that comes from design thinking. And then you come back to, just as Spencer said, there's some things he won't break. you always try, you learn from failure, but you want to have little failures if you can, right? You don't want to have a failure that kills you. So there are always things that the risk is too big to change all at once, but there's a lot of things that you can take the risk, and some people have more risk bandwidth than others. That's the other thing, right? I mean, highly rate, banks by definition, I've been a part of a bank. I know it's not a criticism. They don't take as big a risks as independents because in some sense they can't, they're not allowed to. So they have to move somewhat more incrementally. And the banks that do really well, they balance that line. They find the things that work and they find the changes, and somehow they speed up their change, their change against the market, and they have a competitive advantage. That's beating the competition. That's kind of what it's all about. In particularly with tech, getting better than the competition, having a reason. That's the biggest reason to use tech is I can win more.
Definitely. So, Alistair, when you're working with early adopters of technology, how do you balance building for their needs while also keeping the technology scalable for the rest of the industry?
When I think about that, it's every client's different, and that balance act is different with whom you're working with, and whether it's a good enough organization or a Spencer, let's get in the field and let's win the Super Bowl. You approach it differently, and for me, it's everything that Scott and Spencer kind of discussed already, right? The empathetic, the communication, the confidence, the fear, the mindfulness of sort of what the goals are and who's involved, and taking all those different things into account. And one thing that's not directly related to your question, Rita, but sort of ties in ultimately to success is, words that come to mind are communication, pulse, and from a organization on the outside looking in, which is what Scott and I do when we get in there, right? We sort of kind of are looking in from a different vantage point. All those things come into how you balance this need and this objective for future success and future scalability. And it's emptying out that bucket like Spencer has done, right? It's what does it sort of IT look like today? What do you want it to look like tomorrow? What is it going to achieve, right? What are the results going to be? What are the implications? What are the successes, the potential failures, the risks, etc.? What's going to be the impact to the internal team? What's going to be the impact to the buyers, the users, the investors who are looking to leverage Syndify to invest more in, Spencer's product, his deals that he's syndicating and originating, if you will. So that's kind of what I look at is what does it look like Spencer, what are your goals? What's the end zone look like to you? And sort of what kind of plays do we need to make to get around to not fumble, and if we do, make sure that the ball's picked up by us and not a competitor, and just drive to the end zone successfully. And I think where Spencer has really nailed it is the the leadership has, and Scott I think alluded to this, empowered the organization. And he's removed the fear, he's removed the objection, he's removed the concern. So he set his people up for success, not for fear of use, fear of job replacement, fear of all these different things that happen. And when you empower the folks who are users, the syndicators, the folks on the capital markets front lines like Jacob and John and so forth, and you give them the tools and the ability to say, okay, he's got our back. Let's go, let's run, and let's know that we're going to make some really good decisions here and help drive the team. Be the hero, in other words, right? Don't be fearful for it and not bring it to the forefront. I think Spencer would love more than anything for somebody on the inside, like he said, entrepreneurial and innovative, to come to him and say, Spencer, there's this really cool product out here. There's this really cool opportunity out here. As I was looking at things to collaborate, whether it's with a Tamrock or a Syndify, it doesn't matter. It's having that confidence in your leader to go to him and say, I'm going to do this, even though it might sort of remove some of my tasks. I'm going to do this. So I think all these things come into how we approach the partnership with an organization. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely.
Good.
So just to close us out, we're approaching the end of our time here. I want all of you, I'm going to ask you all the same question. We can kind of go around and you can give each of your answers. Just for a moment, just imagine that we have someone listening to us today who is in the shoes that Spencer was in before he started this collaboration with you. Maybe they're feeling overwhelmed. Maybe they're newly acquired. Maybe they're independent. but they know that they need to modernize. What's one piece of advice that you would give them? Spencer, can you go first?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think having an open mind, um, having, not being, fear kind of takes on a lot of different forms and kind of probably pops up in different ways and places along the process. Um, but I think ultimately just having an open mind and and listening to the team. I think Alistair hit on it. I think about an internal entrepreneur or an intrapreneur, right? You know who those people are on your team that are also creating and coming up with new ideas and thoughts and what if we could do this, what if we could do that. I think giving those individuals a place and an opportunity to feel that they can talk and they can bring these ideas forward without being criticized or judged, right? And just listening, and it doesn't mean that they're all going to work. Maybe some will work and some are now and some are later. Um, but ultimately, just embracing that and um, yeah, being open-minded and then not being afraid to pick up the phone, or I guess we're talking about technology. So other however you want to communicate, and reaching out to your partners, right, and asking the questions and um, getting together and get smart people together, um, like these two gentlemen here on the call with me, and in yourself, Rita, as well. And let's talk and let's think through this and let's think about how it could work, and let's run it down and assess it. And then if it makes sense, let's go to the next step. So again, I think open mind, empathy. Scott mentioned a few times, so important, and then just encouraging and um, empowering everyone around you. Um, really, a lot of this is the things that KLC has achieved is it's not really me. I'm part of the equation, but certainly it's the whole team, and I represent the KLC team today, and we're doing this together. So win together, occasionally fail together, but fortunately we win a lot more than we fail. So.
That's great advice. Scott, how about you? What would your advice be?
My advice would be to listen to Spencer first. Give him a call. No, Spencer said a lot of the things I'm thinking, but I think what I would say is I'd tell people, it's not as big a mountain as you think, when you're looking at doing things differently, and particularly if you're looking at new tech. If you're looking at new tech, it's not as, this isn't the 70s anymore or the 80s where you're swapping out hardware to make new software work. Right? I mean, it's not as big a mountain as you think. And then I'll reiterate what Spencer says. There's people out there. It's very unlikely that whatever problem you as a leader are trying to solve hasn't been at least brought up or solved somewhere else. So don't be afraid to ask questions. And I think you mentioned earlier, Alistair, this is an industry that in some sense they sell the ultimate commodity, a dollar. Right? I've said that since I first got here, but they do it in ways that are different. The competitive differentiation it can have a lot of customization or personalization, which in the old tech world was bad because you ended up on your own code branch and you ended up having to pay to customize. Everything's becoming DIY now, and that you should expect to be able to do things the way you want to do them. You shouldn't have to settle, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you need to make the change. It's kind of that, you walking that line, but personalizing, as Spencer knows, personalizing software and things these days is easier all the time. And so get out and ask, talk to people. Hesitating is the only thing that you can do wrong. Not moving that's a mistake. But everything else, you're moving forward.
It's great advice. Take action, be curious.
Yeah.
Alistair, how about you? What's your advice?
Surround yourself with smart guys like Scott and Spencer. Step one. Two, explore the possibilities. Right? When you have that mindset of what can happen versus what is this going to cost? What's this going to do? Oh my gosh, it's going to be a massive headache. Explore the possibilities together, internally, externally. Sort of have the Spencer mindset of, what could happen if the three of us got together versus me just leveraging, product A or me just leveraging product B. So it's one of my favorite sayings, just explore the possibilities because they're endless, to tie in with everything Scott and Spencer said. So there it is.
That's a great way to wrap this up. Thanks to each one of you, Spencer, Scott, Alistair, for being on the podcast today and for talking about this collaborative journey that you've had together. It's been really great just hearing about it and seeing how each one of you played a different role. So thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Rita.
Rita.
Thank you, Rita.